Welcome back to Beagle Eye Visions. We're right back in the same spot, same building. What building was this? Oh, Wilson Atomatoys corporate headquarters. Time to get out of here since it's cleared. We're on episode number 30, Ending All Evil. It's an hour and 1 minute long. So we'll be splitting this up into 2 episodes as usual. So make sure you stay tuned for part 2 of this episode. We're going to get some more knowledge. Let's run it.
And that's one of the things about religion that we have to remember when we're talking about that makes it such a hot topic issue is because we're talking about law. Who gets to be God? Who gets to be God's deputies? Who is the Most High? Who is the divine authority? It's all about the claim to the Most High. The only way that somebody can be higher than us is if we give away our power. Because there's nobody, we're all equal. But we're not equal in our knowledge, so ultimately I think it does have to be a hierarchy, but it has to be a cooperative hierarchy like a bee colony. It's about what our value system is, what we care about. Hello, Hive Mind. Today is November 11th, 2020, 11/11/2020. I am your host, Douglas Martin, and welcome to the 30th Cubbyhole Podcast, where important topics are unveiled, discussed, and tested. Our website is cubbyhole.com. As of now, a new show is released every Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and every Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific Time. On the last few shows, Nate and Brandon covered the imagination and methods of manipulation, and they're doing a terrific job laying the groundwork in a stepwise progression. So start at podcast 1 and work your way up to this show if you really want to get maximum value out of this podcast. I'd like to dedicate today's show to Mark Passio. He's been the greatest inspiration for all 3 of us here at the Cubbyhole. With his tireless efforts in his research and teaching natural law, we're going to do our part here to help carry the torch for the purpose of human freedom and ending slavery on this planet. I'd also like to give a shout out to Justin Bedini and Jason.
My efforts will be mere stagnation. The greatest scientific minds of history, the Einsteins and the Curies, my namesake, have had something beyond raw data analysis capabilities. They have had a spark. This elusive inspiration is something I must possess.
So, how are you going to do that?
If I am to advance my understanding of medicine in this strange world, I must embark on a great adventure. I must become human, or as close as I can. I must find a way to download all that I am into a human brain.
I know someone who might be able to help. Dr. Amari.
Please, then we must go to her and talk. Perhaps this is an impossibility, but it must be pursued.
Alright, I guess we're gonna start this mission. And yeah, I second that. Mark Passio is a huge inspiration for me as well. Quick shout out to Mark Passio. Thank you for all your work.
Sampson, guys, I had a great time at the Anarchadelphia conference in Philadelphia, and meeting up with you guys there made it a time of my life and made the trip worthwhile. So I hope you're listening and keep up the great work. Today we will be discussing how to recognize evil in our world and the perplexities of what makes it so elusive to us. And I'm also going to introduce Mark Passio's barriers to self-realization. We won't have time to fully flesh these out, but we're at least going to get them on the table for future discussions on the show. They're very important to understand on developing consciousness. We haven't really covered those yet, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce those, and my colleagues here at Cubbyhole will help to continue to flesh those out and better understand the barriers to self-realization, which are the 5-sense illusion, ego identification, the left brain prison, and institutionalized belief. So let's begin. I want to start today with a quote from Jeremy Locke's book, The End of All Evil. And if you haven't read that book, I recommend you do so. It'll help give you a different perspective on some of these concepts and ideas concerning freedom. And we'll provide a link below here, and I want to encourage you to check that book out. So in chapter 1, the chapter is titled Freedom, and he opens with this paragraph. The definition of freedom is the infinite value of the human being. The definition of evil is the destruction of freedom. Everything that is evil teaches people that they have limited value. So when I first read that, it really struck me, I mean, I don't think most people have that concept in their mind concerning freedom. I think most people tend to think that freedom means that they can do whatever the hell they want. And I would suggest that freedom means responsibility to truth. And we understand how ambiguous the idea of truth can be to some people. And I would say that is largely due to, half of what is true is unseen and undetectable with our five senses and the limitations of our five senses. Also wanted to say that I would tell you that the infinite value of the human being is the capacity for understanding principles, and principles being first things. So this is what distinguishes us from the rest of the animal kingdom, is that we have the capacity for reason and logic. And this capacity for understanding these principles is what makes us infinitely valuable as human beings. So why is the concept of freedom so elusive to us? Well, for one thing, we're basically unfamiliar with it. The founding fathers of this country basically founded this country on Freemasonic principles. So this country and its ideals were founded on Freemasonic soil. And I don't want to confuse that with Lodge Masonry. There's a lot of reasons why Lodge Masonry has been or become corrupted, as have all institutions for that matter. I've already said as soon as a secret society was to emerge above ground, above sub rosa, it would be infiltrated by special interests who would infiltrate and pervert teachings and bring perverted teachings out into the light of day to stigmatize the true esoteric teaching that's found in the mystery traditions, which was preserved and helped to be brought into the modern world through the secret society. So, yeah, I mean, the idea of secrecy is repugnant, but at the same time, at a certain point in our human history, it was a necessity. So knowledge has been hidden not just for nefarious reasons, it's also been hidden for benevolent reasons. And it's a very vast topic, so we're going to keep laying out this groundwork here so we can get this into a better perspective and try to put a finer point on things. According to Locke, a principle is a truth that creates freedom, and a law is a lie that creates slavery. That's lowercase law. So I want to talk just for a minute about this word law. It seems to me that in our English vocabulary, the law is the only word that defines an immutable condition, immutable being not changeable. Therefore, immutable, it means changeable. So a law, the true definition of the word law is immutable, like the law of gravity. It cannot be created or changed by man. So let's go ahead and just take a look at some of the definitions that we can find for this word law. And I'm just going to use my computer dictionary for expedience sake and just see what's here. It's giving several definitions for this word, so we already know we're dealing with ambiguity. There should not be ambiguity in the word law. It means immutable. It cannot be changed. It cannot be created or altered by man. So the idea of law has nothing to do with mental constructs of human beings. A law exists in nature and it's unchangeable and unalterable. So here, the first definition it gives is often the law, the system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. They were taken to court for breaking the law, or an individual rule as part of a system of law. A system or systems of law as a subject of study or the basis of the legal profession, statutory law and the common law, a thing regarded as having the binding force or effect on the formal system of rules. See, this is all defining human mental constructs, and there's nothing here. There's a few more. A rule defining correct procedure and behavior in a sport, a statement of fact deduced from observation, the effect that a particular natural or scientific phenomena always occurs if certain conditions are present. Example given, the second law of thermodynamics. That's the closest thing that's here to define this immutable condition. And my point about this is, if the word law in our vocabulary does not define an immutable condition, then what word do we have that does? We got to take that into consideration. I mean, this word immutable is not even in any of these definitions. The closest that it comes to pointing us in that direction is talking about laws of physics and thermodynamics. So my whole point about this is basically comes down to law is simply beyond the dominion or the domain of man. Man does not create laws, nor can he change, alter, or destroy laws. They're they're woven into the fabric of creation. They always have been, and they always will be forevermore, and they will never be changed. They exist in nature. They're inherent in nature. Certain behaviors that we take will always give us the same results, more or less. There's no dynamic left in our vocabulary if the word law does not mean immutable. So there's nothing that man can do, has ever done in his mental constructs with his system of punishment, which is basically
Sorry,
The
Doug.
Institute is finally gone. We can all breathe easier without them lurking behind everyone's lives. Thank you.
Doctor, my friend here needs your help.
Oh? I'm not a mechanic. What could she possibly want from me?
Greetings, Doctor. I wish to download my data and core programming into a human brain.
You want what? Is she serious?
Curie has a lot of pre-war research data, but she can't continue her important work as a robot.
Why not?
There are fundamental limitations in my robotic systems. I have no capacity for the human trait of inspiration.
I've never considered anything like you're proposing. It's an interesting problem. The memories wouldn't be hard. We translate those from the brain to computers and back all the time here. It's how the loungers work. Her personality, though, all the extra pieces of robotic programmed decision-making, a normal organic brain wouldn't know what to do with them. A synth brain, on the other hand, well, it's already somewhere between the two.
You're not suggesting I won't kill a synth.
I'm suggesting nothing of the kind. Allow me to explain. You know about the mind wipes I perform on synths, but the procedure isn't always successful. If something goes wrong, it can leave them in a brain-dead state. Living, but with no cognition. I know a caretaker for one of these brain-dead synths. If they're willing, we could try transferring your friend's consciousness into her.
I'd like to try.
We just need her caretaker's consent. Give me a day to get in contact with them. They're understandably cautious, but I think they'll hear me out.
I will stay with the doctor. Assuming all goes well, I want to be ready for the procedure.
The caretaker should get back to me soon. She's not one to wait.
Right.
transactional form of leadership, punishment and reward. There's nothing that man has ever done that is truly a law. So we need to distinguish man's law from natural law. The laws of creation versus man's mental construct, his arbitrary edicts based on personal preferences and whims of legislators. These can never be moral
Dr.
because
Amar.
they're ambiguous. They're based on personal preference. They will always be biased. The great legislator of today is the forgotten failure of tomorrow. So my point about this is, well, there's a lot of points we can make about it. So let me just continue speaking on this for a minute. Laws cannot be arbitrary. If a law is arbitrary, then it's changeable, you know? So, like say, a politician creates a law, and then the same law is brought forward, quote unquote law, is brought forward to prosecute the politician, then all the politician need to do is change the law. So, we gotta really think about this. So what it comes down to is this. In order to establish man's law, we literally have to overthrow the laws of creation, which is the same as overthrowing the Creator itself. So in order to establish man's law, we have to establish man as God on earth and essentially throughout the universe for that matter. Because in order to establish man's law, you have to overthrow the laws of creation. This is why when we're trying to be in compliance with man's law, we often feel that we're being pushed beyond the bounds of morality, because we are. Everything that is natural for a human being and human behavior is unnatural in a system of man's law. So to set up man's law is to overthrow God. And essentially that's what this is all about. It's not a political lesson, it's a spiritual lesson. Man is not God. The best that we can do is discover the laws in nature and learn to live in harmony with those laws that are part of the fabric of creation itself, set down by the Creator. So in order to embrace man's law, it's totally a metric of spiritual bereavement. So let's deal with this word spirituality. A lot of people have a lot of crazy ideas about spirituality. Most people believe it pertains to something that will happen to the individual beyond mortal existence. A sort of, that life is a preparatory phase for the afterlife, which in a sense it is, but not in the sense that most people think. I mean, you're not going to fly off to a cloud to take harp lessons with a dead relative, nor are you going to experience eternal torment in the fires of hell. And this is all eschatology, which means final things. This is where the eschatology has evolved to. But in its evolution, it has become corrupted. As we go forward through this podcast, we're going to flesh out the source ideas and try to demonstrate how this corruption has taken place in our world through lack of understanding or refusal of truth. So the farther we stray from truth, the farther we fall from perfection as a species. That's a Ben Stewart quote. And I got a lot of inspiration from him in the early phases of my research. But it's true. The majority of the suffering in the world is basically due to not aligning ourselves with truth, which is the same as aligning ourselves with morality or the natural law or the natural laws of creation laid down by the Creator. So this concept of hell, hell isn't some place that you go to. It comes to you. It will visit you in the physical world. We have free will. And with that free will, we have the option to build a paradise, or we can build a hell or a prison on earth. Because the spiritual and the physical domain are happening in the same place at the same time. Mark had mentioned something about the tenets of the Egyptians. Is very profound, that he said that the Egyptians had two primary tenets. One was that ignorance is the only evil, and the other was that what happens here matters. So if we take a look at modern religions, we'll see that they put the emphasis on what's going to happen after this life, rather than what's happening here now being the most important thing. So I just want to make sure I made all these points before I move forward. So first of all, the afterlife has nothing to do with flying off to a cloud to take harp lessons with a dead relative, nor does it have anything to do with eternal torment in hellfire. But what's most important is what happens here. And whether or not we are or are not in alignment with truth will determine the results that we get here. And if we take a good look around at the results that we've gotten, it's a direct metric for how far we've strayed from truth. God's given us the greatest gift of free will, and that means that we can have anything that we want in this universe except for one thing, and it's the one thing that we seem to want the most. You know, the idea that everybody wants the thing that they can't have. It's related to that. But it's also related to the refusal of truth. You know, man, or, some men or people, they want to do whatever they want without consequence. And this natural law that we're talking about, it's also been referred to as the law of consequentialism. It's a dynamic that's laid down in the universe, or it's a law that's laid down in the universe that governs the dynamics of human behavior. Beings that have the capacity for reason and logic to make their own choices. This is what this natural law is about. So, we can have anything we want except for one thing, and that's control of the extant. And the need to control the extant is an action based in fear. And an action based in fear results in chaos. So we need to learn this. This is part of aligning ourselves with truth. If we are compliant with man's, quote, law, all of our actions are actually, in fact, based in fear, because they're based in fear of repercussions or punishment that man's law has ordained for itself to issue punishment for those who are not in compliance with man's arbitrary edicts. So I'm going to give you an Albert Churchward quote right here. Well, before I go any further, let me just say this. So based on Jeremy Locke's definition for freedom, that freedom is the infinite value of the human being, and evil is that which destroys freedom, we can better understand why we don't recognize evil in our midst, because all of these concepts for man's law, I believe that, in many cases they have good intentions, but see, good intentions pave the road to hell, and that's what that means. So what your intent was really doesn't have anything to do with the final result, and you cannot accidentally do the right thing. So good intentions don't cut it. Good intentions pave the road to hell, and everything man's law imposes on us as a species is always imposed under the guise of it's for the greater good. So our freedom, it will definitely be stripped from us for the greater good. But see, what we're failing to recognize is that without freedom, nothing good can result from that. So if freedom is being lost, it cannot be for the greater good. It's an illusion. It's part of, what I would refer to as the socialist mindset. But again, here we have another ambiguous term. See, our language is so ambiguous, we can practically say it's irreparably destroyed. So when you have, if you wrote down legislation 100 years ago and then the language degrades and becomes more ambiguous, then the same legislation written down 100 years ago no longer means the same thing. And our language has been degraded all the way to the point where our most basic words literally mean the opposite of what they once did, all the way to the point where good now means bad. And you got Michael Jackson running around singing, I'm bad, but what he really means is I'm good. So, we have to keep that in mind, these good intentions, and be more responsible and mature as adult human beings to take responsibility to understand that these ideas are fleeting and that if we don't make them our priority, principles, first things, that freedom will be lost, and with that, everything that is good and decent in this world. Without freedom, you have nothing, absolutely nothing, but torment and suffering. So it's, that's part of what our human purpose is not only to discover the natural law, but to preserve the spiritual armor and the knowledge and pass that forward to progeny and posterity. That's our human purpose. And once we realize how difficult that is to do, and that the knowledge has already almost been lost once before, and still could be, is on the precipice of going out forever now, then we'll understand that, that's going to take a tremendous effort on our part to turn this around. If it's not already too late, which isn't really for anybody to say. Based on what we see in the world, it does appear that it's too late to turn it around, but we're not doing this for the sake of people. We're doing this for the sake of truth and attempting to make available the knowledge that is necessary to stem the tide. That's what we're doing here at Cubbyhole, as well as trying to make a repository to preserve as much of the lost wisdom as we can, so we can access it and use that knowledge to flesh out the dogma in the world today. If we can define freedom as the infinite value of the human being, then we can define evil as that which destroys freedom. That gives us a much better looking glass to identify evil in the world. We have to remember that tyranny comes to the door in a uniform, and that everything that happened in the 20th century and all of the atrocities, many of those people believed they were truly moral, believed they were truly doing the right thing. However, the results suggest something quite different. The results represent many European societies in total moral decay. The Carlos Castaneda quote, all the sorcerer has to do is give you his mindset, which is to keep you in cognitive dissonance or dual consciousness. It's basically related to the, primacy of matter. That matter is really the only thing that matters, and that what we can't see really doesn't exist or can be ignored. And this is what leads us down the path. So part of the reason that the knowledge has been lost or compromised is because a lot of it deals with unseen forces, and the methods to discover these unseen laws of nature, they took a long period of time to develop. And once that's compromised, we could find ourselves in a situation where we could never recover it. If we haven't already, but no, we haven't, because it's still here with us, and we still have a chance to flesh this back out and help people learn and understand how to align with truth. So the socialist mindset, what I say, when I use the term socialism, I mean all forms of coercive government. So any form of coercive government is a form of socialism, and that includes capitalism. So this idea of capitalism, a lot of people think that capitalism is the only solution for communism, and they don't understand that, first of all, as long as you had any form of coercive control and centralized control of resources, which is what all forms of capitalism that we've ever experienced are in fact just forms of socialism, and that capitalism could only expedite what we know in the political sense as socialism or communism. It's a fast track to communism. That's all it ever could be, because there's never been any such thing as laissez-faire capitalism, because all of these ideas about economic controls or economic freedoms cannot exist when you have coercive government established in the world. But ultimately, money is a form of slavery as well, and it's a more powerful form of slavery even than government or socialism. So we have to keep that in mind and understand that I know a lot of people that have kicked statism that'll probably live the rest of their life and never kick the religion of money. And these are both religions, the religion of authority and the religion of money, in the sense that they hold us back from expanding and growing in consciousness. Therefore, they're holding us back from our progress as a species and evolving the species. They're stagnating our development because they create master-slave relationships in the world. They are forms of evil because they destroy freedom. So the idea of spirituality is not really pertaining to what happens to us in the afterlife. It's more pertaining to us, what's happening to us now. And this idea of enlightenment is really what the resurrection is about. When we're born into consciousness, when the child in us dies and the adult is born. In order for the adult to be born, we have to grow up. The child inside us must die. I don't know if you remember the movie The Omen, but that's really what that was about. You know, the priest comes to him and tells the emissary who's adopted the alleged son of Satan that his son is the Antichrist and the child must die. And he attempts to murder his child rather than just grow up and realize that man's law is slavery. And that's really what the priest was trying to tell him. The child inside of you, Mr. Thorne, must die. And he projects that into the extant and tries to murder his adopted son. But, you know, it's really a profound allegory, but it's very disturbing. And the 666 just typifies attachment to the physical realm. It's the attachment to the physical realm, the attachment to matter that keeps us in fear. And the fear compels us to control. And the action to control results in more chaos. So what spirituality is, it's an ambiguous term. You know, we're going to be continuing to discuss spirituality throughout the podcast. I mean, it's the most important endeavor for which us as a species could ever undertake. But see, it doesn't concern really what's happening post-mortem to the individual. It concerns what happens in this lifetime, in our lifetime. This idea of enlightenment, I mean, resurrection, it corresponds to resurrection. Resurrection happens in this life or it doesn't happen at all. It means being born into consciousness, to have risen above the carnal desires. So true spirituality is about resisting that which destroys freedom. And money and government are probably the two biggest religions in this world that do that very thing. Religion, the term religion in the context of that which holds us back, rather than that which binds us to. So we have to keep that in mind because this is part of why we don't recognize evil in our midst. When Ted Bundy lured women into his car, he did that by driving a nice car and wearing an expensive suit. The devil doesn't come up to you and say, "Hi, I'm the devil." Not that, I believe in the devil or the concept of the Christian archetypal devil, but the concept of the devil is that he's a deceiver. He's deceptive. The devil's a woman in a red dress, so to speak. The devil doesn't come up and sit down beside you and say, "Hi, I'm the devil, and I'm going to enslave you and torment you in eternal hellfire." No, he disguises himself and he gets you to let your guard down. It's related to the vampire myth. The vampire has no effect on you until you invite him into your house, and then you're powerless to resist his powers of persuasion. It's a perfect archetype for government. So we have to understand why we don't recognize evil in this world is partly because we're indoctrinated into the idea that man's law is benevolent or could ever be benevolent. And we're negating the fact that in order to establish that, we have to overthrow the laws of creation, which is an abdication of responsibility to truth, for which we should suffer. It's positive because it means that man doesn't get to be God. Maybe he can establish himself for a short time and reign on earth for a short time. But, in Dante's Inferno, Satan is encased in a block of ice at the center of hell because he still has a master over him, and that's fear. Fear is the master. So really it comes down to the amount that somebody believes in the legitimacy of socialism, which is all forms of coercive government, is a direct metric of how spiritually bereft they actually are. They have no concept of freedom nor any concern for freedom. They're only concerned about their freedom and their betterment, and the rest of the world be damned. And that's based in allowing the ego to set up as executor of the being, which is associated with the left brain imbalance. We're going to get into that a little bit when we talk about these barriers to self-realization. There's so many things I'm trying to jam-pack into this show, so I'm going to kind of take my time with it a little bit. One of the things I want to say is that in my second presentation, I was talking about ultimately the world would have to be a hierarchy like a bee colony, and it's all about what we care about. Ultimately, I suggested that the world does have to, result in some kind of hierarchical order, like a bee colony, and everybody is using their talent to perform the task for the same great work is the whole idea. I just want to clarify a little bit what I'm talking about, because Nathan decided to use that at least for the beginning intro for this whole podcast series. So I'm hearing it every time I turn on the show, so I feel like I better clarify that a little bit. What I meant when I said that was it's about respect for the elders. And when I'm talking about the evolution of the mythos and the stellar cult people, which was the first phase in the evolution of the mythos, I'm talking about a civilization that had already learned the dangers and the evils of socialism, which is all forms of coercive government, and had abandoned it, never to return to it. And as a result, they created a civilization that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, leading all the way up to the point where they had built the pyramids, which was the pinnacle of their achievement. So a lot of what I'll be talking about on this show is why those pyramids were built and what the significance of them being built actually is about. Because it's directly, if to hear me tell it, if we don't understand this about why the pyramids were built.
All right, that's a good spot for a break. Well, kind of. I'm in a tight spot, but we're gonna get inside this 4-leaf fish packing plant, one way or the other. Take care of these super mutants. Stay tuned. Stick around for the next episode.